So what brings you here tonight? I imagine that many of you came to listen to a friend. Some of you, I'm sure, were schlepped out by a family member. There's probably a small percentage of you who thought that the backs of your heads are finally camera ready, and they're gorgeous. But whatever motivation, whatever reason that you came here tonight, I found myself as an educator thinking a lot about what are the reasons, what are the motivations that bring people to religious experiences. A few years ago, I was at an event run by the organization I have the privilege to work for, NCSY. And at this NCSY event, hundreds of teenagers came to study Torah. And I was looking around at the teens who were at that event, and I started wondering, why did they show up to this? And of course, most of them probably came because it was a gorgeous hotel. A few of the teens come because they're experiencing difficulty at home, maybe their home life isn't great, and they want to get out and find another great, safe, warm environment. Maybe some teens, and a vast majority of them came because their friends were going. And there's always that one teen who comes for the kugel. But whatever reason people were coming, I found myself frustrated. Because as a religious educator, the reason why I came to teach Torah, to be involved in a religious experience, I was frustrated by the fact that most teens who showed up there didn't show up for authentic religious engagement. They didn't show up to learn theologically about themselves or about their religion. They came for the friends, they came for the hotel, and they came for the kugel. So the question I wanted to know is, can you have meaningful, engaging religious experiences that emerge from perhaps more shallow religious motivations? Do you need to come for the right reasons, quote unquote? And I found myself frustrated. And I met somebody at that event. It was somebody I met through a text who I think was going through the same frustrations that I was experiencing at that very event. His name was Jonah. Jonah was a prophet. He was a prophet who spoke to God, he communicated with God, he went on missions for God. And God came to Jonah, and he sent Jonah on a mission. He said, I want you to go and speak to the people of Nineveh, and I want you to tell them to repent. And Jonah, this prophet who had a relationship with God, he didn't go to Nineveh, he ran. And he ran away, and he found himself on a boat. And on this boat, they hit really stormy waters. Everybody above deck started getting really anxious. The boat was rocking back and forth, and people started crying out to their respective gods. They were anxious, they were nervous, they were fearful. Where was Jonah? Jonah was below deck, taking a nap. Once again, Jonah ran. He abdicated his responsibility. Eventually, the people above board threw Jonah overboard. And Jonah, and this is the part of the story that you're probably familiar with, gets swallowed by a big fish. And the fish spits him out, and Jonah reluctantly, begrudgingly agrees to follow through on his mission, and he goes to Nineveh. And finally afterwards, he confronts God, and he tells God why he ran. He tells God why he kept on turning his back on his responsibilities. He explains what was frustrating him and what was so difficult for him. And doing this, Jonah repurposed a prayer that many of you may be familiar with. He repurposes a prayer that was said by Moshe, called the Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim, the 13 attributes of God. Moshe describes God as a Racham, a Chanan, somebody who's compassionate, who's kind, Erech HaPayim, he's patient, the Emes, and he's truthful. Jonah takes that very same prayer and he changes one crucial word. He calls God a Racham, he's merciful. He calls God a Chanan, says Erech HaPayim, he's patient. But instead of calling God Emes, truthful, he changes that last phrase. And instead of saying Emes, he says V'nichem al hara. V'nichem al hara, if you hear that word, nichem, derives from the same word as nechama, meaning comfort. Jonah was confronting God, and he was telling God, I don't want to go on your mission. I don't want to go on your missions because you're not sending me on missions of truth. You're sending me on missions of comfort. You're sending me on missions that don't have the urgency of theological truth and authenticity. You're sending me on missions to provide comfort. And I'm not a social worker. I don't want to be their security blanket. I'm not a therapist, and I'm not the programmer at an event who has to order the bouncy castle. That's not what I do. Jonah, in fact, his name, Jonah ben Amittai, means Ben Amittai Emes. He literally, in his name, was motivated by truth. And he kept on finding himself, whether it was on the mission to Nineveh or was on that boat, surrounded by people who their religious life was only motivated by comfort. It was only motivated by that momentary respite that they should be able to assuage the pain and the terror of life. But it wasn't motivated by truth. It wasn't motivated by the authenticity of a relationship with God. And this frustration that Jonah had is something that's been echoed generation after generation by many critics of religion. Karl Marx famously once said that religion is the opiate of the masses. What does it mean that religion is the opiate of the masses? It means that religion isn't providing anything real. It's not providing anything true. It's an opiate. It's a comfort. It's a quick drug that will distract you from all the things causing you pain in your life. And that was who Jonah was. Jonah didn't want to be a drug pusher. Jonah was a frustrated outreach professional involved in Kiruv, whether it was in Nineveh or whether it was on that boat, who wanted to turn in the other direction and didn't want to dispense those opiates. There was a great psychologist named Gordon Alpert. In 1967, Gordon Alpert wrote a really important essay about the motivations to religious life. And in this essay, he says that religious life has two poles in terms of what motivates people to religious engagement. On one side of the pole, he calls intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation are people who come to religion for the intrinsic qualities, for the text, the theology, the creed, the ritual. They're there for the right reasons. On the other end of the pole, Gordon Alpert says, are people who are extrinsically motivated. They're there because their friends are there. They're there because it's a great way to get together with family. They're there because they like the food. They're there because they really like that bouncy castle that they had at the event. But they're not there for the intrinsic purposes. Now, most people are somewhere in the middle. But Jonah was firmly on the point of intrinsic motivation. The phrase Gordon Alpert uses to describe the difference between the two poles is he says that people who are intrinsically motivated live their religion. The people who are extrinsically motivated use their religion. And the word use is so poignant because you use an opiate, you use drugs, you don't live it. And Jonah wasn't interested in being party as an educator and being sent on missions for people who were only extrinsically motivated. He wanted intrinsic motivation. So where does Jonah's story end? Jonah ends up wandering through a desert, and he's schwitzing and he's tired, and he finally comes to a tree that God created for him. And underneath this tree, Jonah finally finds some shade, and he's able to cool off and relax for a little bit. And then God destroys the tree, and he rebukes Jonah. And he says, the same way that you developed a relationship with this tree, you should have had mercy and developed a relationship with the people of Nineveh who I sent you to. And then the story goes dark. That's the end. What was God telling Jonah? There's an amazing poet named Christian Wyman. Christian Wyman grew up and spent most of his life as an atheist. He wasn't involved in religious life. He wasn't involved in religious text. Until, unfortunately, he was diagnosed with cancer. And the experience of being diagnosed with cancer, he turned to religion. The terror of being in a hospital ward, the terror of having your life out of your control, he found meaning in religious practice. And in his collection, My Bright Abyss, he addresses his critics. He addresses the critics that he knew all too well were rolling their eyes at him and quietly mumbling that we get it. We know why you turned to religion. You were scared, you needed some context, you needed some way of fabricating a purpose to existence because of the anxiety and the terror of being at the doorsteps of death and confronting cancer. And in that essay, he responds to those critics. And he has a remarkable line. He says that to admit that there may be some psychological need in forming your return to faith doesn't preclude or diminish the spiritual imperative any more than acknowledging the chemical aspects of sexual attraction lessen the mystery of enduring human love. And that's what God, in a way, was telling Jonah. That comfort is a part of the human experience. Nechama is a part of the human condition. And no matter what motivation people may have, no matter how shallow or how real or what anxiety it is that's motivating somebody to religious life, doesn't preclude or diminish the mystery, the enduring mystery of religious life. And that from a shallow motivation can emerge a rich and meaningful religious existence. And I think that might be why we read Jonah on Yom Kippur. Because every year on Yom Kippur, we take out the book of Jonah. And you can imagine that in the back of shul, there are people who are looking around, and they're seeing the people who really never show up. They're not involved in spiritual introspection. They're not involved in coming to shul on a weekly or daily basis. And it's really easy in that moment, in the back of the shul, in your pew on Yom Kippur, to look around and maybe start to roll your eyes and question and say, I know why you're here. Your mom schlepped you here. You see him over there? He's just there to hang out with his friends in the back. And that guy, right over there, he doesn't even listen to this. He's here because he's bored at home and his wife kicked him out. And it's really easy on Yom Kippur to look around and start to question or be suspicious of people's religious motivations. And every year on Yom Kippur, we take out the book of Jonah, and we remind those people who are criticizing others or who maybe are suspicious of their own motivations and the own reasons of why they find themselves in shul that day. Who am I to be in shul right now at this moment when the rest of my year is so different and so disconnected from this experience? And we take out the book of Jonah and we remind ourselves that no matter what door you enter in through to religious life, whether it's the door of truth and you enter in through the experiences of MS, or whether it's the door of comfort, and that's the reason that's bringing you into shul, no matter what door you enter in to your religious experience, we're glad that you're here.